Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Exploring Nollywood podcast. I'm your host, Mimi, and with me, I have a very special guest. I've actually worked for her, writing on the site. So, okay, please, can you introduce yourself to the listeners?
Hello, everyone. My name is Oge, and I run a website where I review Nigerian movies called NollywoodReinvented.com. And I have been running this website for 9 years now.
I think your website was part of the reason why I got into Nollywood at the
Yay!
beginning. Yeah,
Nice.
because at the beginning, we were just if you listen to podcasts, I've especially always watched Nollywood, and then when I came to the UK, it was sort of like a good way to hold on past and that. And when I started watching it, I discovered your site, and I was like, oh, this is really interesting. And so I started reading, I started watching more, and I was like, you know what? Why don't I write as well? And so how did you get into Nollywood? How did you? We'll talk about how you got into Nollywood first, and then we'll talk about your creation of the site. So, how did you get into Nollywood?
So I did listen to your podcast as well, where you went over your Nollywood story with your co-host, and I think our stories are pretty similar. I mean, I grew up watching Nollywood movies, going to like the store and renting VHS and rewinding and all of that jazz. And then when I moved over to America, there was also not that connection. There wasn't a lot of people to discuss Nollywood movies, which is where I started writing. But Nollywood was always a connection back home. So that love has endured on and off, but mostly endured.
It is so interesting because everyone I've talked to that has moved from Nigeria has that story. So it's really important to us as Nigerians, like the role. I'm sorry.
Right.
So it seems really important to us. So how did you get into writing? Where did you get the idea from? Because at that point, I think there was only like 3 blogs and they weren't really Nollywood. So how did you get the idea, and how did you get into creating the site?
Honestly, I think it was like frustration that birthed the idea, because I remember watching a movie. Like when I was in Nigeria and in boarding school in Nigeria, we would go on vacation, watch a bunch of Nigerian movies, and then when we come back to school or come back to the dorms, we'd all gather and talk about the movies that we watched. If you haven't seen it, somebody would tell you the whole story, and then we'd deconstruct.
I love that.
Why did the mother-in-law do that? Why did she do? What kind of a stupid woman is it? If it was me, I would have done it like this. And I would watch these movies, and none of my white friends were there to talk to me about it. So I tried to find somewhere online to have the discussions, and it didn't exist. So not even just that it didn't exist, like there wasn't a presence. I wanted a place where I could Google Ebube Nwagbo and Google Mike Ezronye and type in cultist, and I wanted life incidents to pop up. I wanted to be able to find the movies that I loved, and there wasn't a presence. So I set out to create that platform, so to speak.
And so at the beginning, was there like much obstacles you had to overcome, any hardships?
It was a learning curve, because there weren't too many. It wasn't like someone I could go to and just basically copy what they've done. Back then, there were 2 prominent Nigerian reviewers. There was Nollywood Forever, and there was Miss Tilly. But honestly, aside from that, I was trying to do something. Honestly, I don't even know if I knew that I was trying to do something different. I just kind of did what I wanted to do and learned as I went. Of course, as time went by, there was all the other struggles, like when you didn't like a movie and then the actor insults you on Twitter.
Last episode, we actually talked about that. I wrote a review, and I can still remember that movie. That movie was so bad. So I wrote a review. What's it called? Oh, it had Mona Lisa Chinda in it, and oh crap,
I don't know if it was that. I feel like I know the way you're talking about. Was it with Desmond Elliott and the
No. This was when the sort of newer Nollywood movies were coming in. So they went like traditional, and it had Mona Lisa Chinda and the lady that came from me. So I wrote a bad review on the site. I wrote I think that was my most damning review ever. And so she comes in on the comments And then she messages me and like just full on encouragement.
Wow.
It was so
Wow. Yeah, that at least it teaches you to have a tough skin. At least this person had the decency to like email you in private. I've been dragged on Twitter and I'm just like, do you have no shame? No, definitely
so
interesting.
I definitely understand that.
It's a
But the thing
learning
is,
curve
we
for
are
sure.
even harsh. I feel like we.
Honestly, I don't. There's this account on Instagram, and I don't remember the name right now. And I just read the reviews, and I'm just like, you're still alive. If I tried this a few years ago, they would have found me and burned down my house. But every other review is insulting the generation of the filmmaker, and I'm just like, okay, this is what we do now, I guess.
But as you were saying, what other obstacles did you find was like someone wouldn't expect if you're just like a review blog?
I think the biggest challenge really is living abroad and reviewing Nigerian movies in Nigeria. There were access issues, and I mean, since I've started the blog, the distribution pattern for Nigerian movies have evolved. I started when we were just DVDs. The cinema culture was just growing, and technically, you can still say the cinema culture is still just growing.
It is.
But I remember tweeting a while back that like people nowadays are spoiled. Sugar Rush came out in December, November, and you're already watching it on Netflix. Do you know how many years I had to wait for EJ to come to become available after it was released initially? Like, so there was definitely a lot of challenges trying to get my hands on the movie. Now with the whole Netflix Roku TV, I think there's definitely an advantage. We're growing.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the access we now have. As you said, those days you see a movie advertised on social media or on YouTube, and it would take up to years to get the movie. So how do you think? I'm sorry?
I said plural years, not just one.
Yeah. I'm still waiting for some movies. I haven't seen them. But you know, the fact that YouTube, Iroko, Ibaka, Netflix, how do you think that has changed the way you review movies?
I think it's just changed the way I think of it. Even before it became more prominent, it was kind of clear where the trajectory was going. I mean, Nollywood has a lot of viewers outside Nigeria, not just the Nigerians and diaspora. There's people from the islands that watch Nigerian movies. I mean, the goal is eventually to maybe get to a place where Korean dramas or Indian movies are, probably Korean dramas more so for foreign watchers. So we're going to start getting judged against international standards. And that's when I went back with the website and I kind of divided things up. So now I have a separate section for home videos, which I would refer more to as things that don't have a cinematic release, things where the filmmaker isn't things where they're not pushing an international appeal. I mean, it doesn't mean it won't be seen internationally, but I'm a bit softer on my numbering ratings for that. But then there's also the big releases. There's your wedding party. There's your living in bondage, and those I hold more to international standards. Things I won't tolerate for an American movie, I don't want to tolerate it for a living in bondage. And within reason, right? Because I know that the budget for living in bondage is not Game of Thrones, but still certain aspects like the story should make sense and the things that you're asking the audience to believe. So that's definitely something that has changed with the move towards online. I'm holding movies to higher standards.
So reviewing Nollywood. We've talked a bit about that, reviewing Nollywood. But what are the like concessions you make from Nollywood? What are the so for example, to me, the biggest sin a Nollywood movie can make is to be boring. I don't care whatever is happening. If it's boring, it just should not happen. So what are some special things that you look forward to review in a Nollywood movie? What are the concessions? What are the things that you want to see in Nollywood?
I think something I want to see more of, probably going forward, actually, not so much in our movies right now, is just things that are originally ours. So, I don't want to see a Nigerian movie, a Nollywood movie that could have as well been made in Brooklyn, that could have
Okay.
as well been made in any other country. Like, I want things that make it seem Nigerian. It doesn't mean that we all have to tie our and run around trees, but when we try to act like Victoria Island and Third Mainland Bridge is the beginning and the end of Nigeria, that's a bit far-fetched. And that doesn't mean don't shoot movies in Victoria Island, but let your characters be distinct.
Nigerian.
Let Sade be Sade and different from Tiffany Baker. I want to feel something there. And I think the best Nigerian movies really pull you into a world that you can only get from Nigerian movies. So when a movie succeeds in doing that, I think that's definitely a bar above the rest, which is why I keep referencing this village running scene from Living in Bondage. It just felt very, you can't get that in any other industry. Yeah, it felt very us. But besides that, something I look for in every movie is just good, honestly, good storytelling. I think we don't have money for a lot of fancy technology. We don't have money. Sometimes you might be watching a movie where the budget is very low and they keep talking about this wedding, we keep planning this wedding, and then when it's time for the wedding, you won't see the wedding. It'll be the day after the wedding and people are coming in, or the evening of the wedding and people are coming in from the wedding. I mean, I know you couldn't afford to show a wedding, and that's fine, but just make sure your story is solid. And make sure your writing doesn't make the absence feel missed.
Do you think that there are some stories that are uniquely Nigerian?
I do. Do you know? I think so. I think let me see. I think certain themes appear worldwide in different forms. Like love is a universal theme, but love in Abeokuta is different from love. Actually, you know what? I should start making more Igbo references. Love in Owerri is different from love in Los Angeles. I mean, and we shouldn't give an Owerri setting and be pretending like you have the same issues you would in Los Angeles. I think the themes are the same, but the way it manifests in our society is different. And it's not that it's wrong for you to decide to make a Los Angeles story in Owerri or Lagos. It's just that if people had a choice been watching a Los Angeles story set in Los Angeles, made by people in Los Angeles, versus a Los Angeles story set in a way made by people from Lagos, we would choose the more authentic one and just go with that. So if you want to have an edge, then stick to things that make you different, I think.
Okay. That's what about things that you excuse just because it's a Nigerian movie? Because we all know that if we're criticizing not a Hollywood movie, and if we're criticizing a Nollywood movie, the standards are not the same. So what are some of the things where you are willing for your standards to be dropped?
So the analogy I gave you with the wedding movie where the wedding never happens, those are things that you expect to like excuse in Nigerian movies, I think. And then there was that Living in Bondage moment. I don't know if you remember, where Ramsey first meets Nnamdi and he gives him the car keys and they're driving around. That scene was so very obviously green screen to me. Like, it was very CGI. It was very obviously not real. And things like that, I don't know. I wouldn't see that ish in Fast and Furious. But you see it and you shake your head and you're like, I guess this is how far the budget's reached. So what we get is what we get.
Or accepting of special effects failing.
I still make notes of it. It's mentioned in my review, but I'm less accepting of it in a Living in Bondage than I am in a regular Iroko TV movie. Something else I guess we accept is like those gunshot scenes where fire is coming out of the end. I'm like, which gun still has fire in 2020? Which gun? Why are we still doing this? You don't think about it. You've accepted it in all the Nollywood movies you've been watching until one day somebody points it out. Those are my concessions: bad graphics and low budgets.
So what does a bad Nigerian movie look like? to you?
Boring. Like you said.
Just generally, as watchers of Nollywood, we watch a lot of crap.
Agreed.
But we watch it to the end. So what is that thing that makes you stop while watching your film and you're like, this is too much, I can't take it anymore?
Like, I can't take this rubbish anymore. I think it's probably different for people like you and I versus the average watcher of a Nollywood, because you and I would probably see a movie that most people think is okay and will think is 2 rungs below average at best. And they're just like, you're too tough. But many of those people who think it's okay are watching it while they're cooking food that takes 5 hours to cook. So they're not really having to sit down and endure the overly drawn out scenes. They're not having to sit down and watch this actor try and act. And you're having to watch that. I think for me, a bad movie is just one that, like, the story is just bad. Like, the story is one where the story isn't developed enough to keep anybody's attention, and that's where it begins. And then if you now add on to that people who cannot act and are trying to convince themselves that they can act, talk less of me, those two together it's a no-go. And I think it's probably the same for the average viewer. Like, a story that doesn't make sense plus bad acting, I think we will tolerate bad production, but
we will get bad stuff.
No, we won't. I don't think so. Because that's what we started watching Nollywood for, is the stories. We liked the stories. Nothing else was working. The acting was maybe working, but like, the stories were entertaining. And if you're not doing that, then why is this camera on?
Oh, that's a lovely way to say that, and it's quite true. This is a point of contention. Old Nollywood versus new Nollywood. Yes. So new Nollywood is giving us different things, different stories, as you said, different acting, different type of things. So what makes a good new Nollywood movie to you? And obviously, we're talking about not the YouTube, although some YouTube movies are really crushing it. But exactly. What makes a good new Nollywood movie?
What are you considering new Nollywood movie? I'm considering I would kind of consider Iroko TV movies new Nollywood to a certain extent, or are you considering just like the big budget ones new Nollywood?
This is something I need to do an episode on, because I keep mentioning new Nollywood, old Nollywood, and very few people know that. Exactly. But new Nollywood movies are the ones on Iroko, are the ones you find on Ibaka or like Afrivo or all those other ones. Compared to,
I mean, those old Genevieve feeling kind of movies are still being made in Asaba.
So those movies they're still being released on YouTube, and they have like 8 parts as normal. There's a marked difference between that and the movies that you find on Iroko, for example, because the production is higher, the stories are different, everything is just like new. We're not like the old new Nollywood that we knew in our childhood. So what would you consider to be a good new Nollywood movie? It's a bit of a weird question, because we've just been talking about a new Nollywood movie. But I think the main issue for me is that the demarcation isn't as clear as you would want it to be. So it's very hard to understand.
And everybody will have a different definition, but now that you've defined it, at least people know what you mean or what you're referring to.
I'm definitely going to do an episode on that.
So I will look forward to listening to that episode.
So movies on Iroko, on Ibaka, not the ones on YouTube that have 8 seasons and all star freaks.
I'm sorry. I don't understand the fascination with Ken Eriks. I've not heard his name so much until I started listening to the podcast. I'm just like, what is this? Did I miss something? Don't say maybe I will understand, but Ken Eriks, no offense to Ken. Ken, I love you. I'm not going to lie, but come on. What is all this Ken Eriks?
I can't explain it to myself.
Wow. Damn, the way you just shaded the poor man. He's somewhere minding his business. And you're just like, not Ken Eriks to everybody else. Wow.
He's always on my mind, I can't lie.
Apparently, what he's doing is working, because he's staying on your mind. Oh gosh. Okay, cool. Sorry, your question is what makes a good new Nollywood movie, in my
Yeah.
estimation? I think when we started making new Nollywood movies, we all decided to stay in the same setting, the same genre of storytelling. There's always it's really pretty people, doing really pretty people things and falling in love in pretty houses. There's not a lot of fabric to the storyline. There's not a lot of depth. And one example is coming up to my mind right now. There's this movie called Cooked Up Love, and I
Oh.
think it has Enado DJ in it and pretty boy Jimmy Odukoya. And it's a love story about two exes. The guy is a chef, and then he has to end up working with his ex-girlfriend, and then they fall in love again. Pretty simple enough. There's no reason why it shouldn't work. The problem is it's very formulaic. That's what it is. That's my problem with new Nollywood movies. It's just we have this formula that we think that will work. What's it called? Two people hate each other, then they love each other. But we don't actually write in the fabric the parts that will make people fall in love with the characters, the parts that will make people fall in love with the storyline. Not old Nollywood was probably able to achieve that easier because there's a longer time for you to get to know the characters, so they could fill it up with all the useless fluff that they want. And we didn't know better, so we accepted all the useless scenes. But at the end of the movie, we got to a part where we knew these characters, we had an attachment to them. When they were finally getting revenge on their, I don't know, mother-in-law, we felt the passion with them. But now that everything is an 60 minutes to 90 minutes, you don't have that time. So you have to make sure your writing has in it something that will make the audience fall for the characters or connect with the characters. If not, you're just writing a formula. You're writing scene 1, boy and girl meet. Scene 2, boy and girl fight. Scene 3, boy and girl cry. Scene 4, boy and girl fall in love. Like, otherwise, you need to make it different from the other story, the other movie that's telling the exact same story in a different setting. Is what. So a good Nollywood movie, long story short, is one that actually creates a connection, at least.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I agree. And I think I don't need to ask about the bad new Nollywood because I think you've said it, and I feel like I bashed new Nollywood a lot.
I mean, we can do better. So we're just pushing them to do better. That's what that is. That's how I think of it.
Yes, let's agree on that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's move on to Living in Bondage, the sequel. Have you watched the OG 1992 one?
Absolutely. I actually watched it again, like, I think a few days before the sequel came out on Netflix. So it was still fresh in my mind.
As you've spoken a bit of it, but how would you approach reviewing a movie like that? What are the things that you look for? What makes it good in your eye and what makes it bad? How do you quantify the different terms and the different categories? So how is your approach to us interviewing that kind of reviewing, not interviewing?
Reviewing a Living in Bondage. Got you. So I think the easy trap is to try and draw similarities to the original or be insulted if it doesn't fit. I think and it's with adaptations of books to movies because you have an emotional attachment to something. Living in Bondage, the original is a huge film for most people, and many people saw it when it first came out, and those people are still in their prime today, and those people are watching the sequel. I think the film did a good job of honoring its past while being a completely different story. Because if it was just going to, I don't know, continue the story of Andy, then there would be a lot more pressure on it. But because it's the story of his son, it's a whole new story, and it still brings back the Bob Manuel, your Kanayo, so you still feel that connection. So I don't begrudge it too much. I don't know if you've seen The Perfect Picture. It's a Ghanaian movie with Shirley, and she did a remake. She did a sequel, so to speak, now. Exactly. And that's still the same character. So that one probably has a harder mountain to climb than Living in Bondage would, because Living in Bondage, the sequel, is different stories. And that one was the same people, just continued later. So I try to separate the stories and just, review it as its own work. Mm-hmm.
So what do you actually think of the film?
I loved it. And I mean, I've seen it 2.5 times because by the third time I'm just like, okay, it's too much. You need to behave yourself. I loved it. I think it definitely had its flaws. But still, I think the general feeling of the movie, like, what a film, and I was entertained. What did you think?
Oh well, I really liked it because
I see that.
in terms of the podcast, we spoke to my sister's boyfriend, and he was talking about all the things about Nollywood that he just kind of understands because he's white. And then watch that film with him, and I think I enjoyed it even more because then you now kind of hear like, oh, this is cinematography. Oh, this is plot. And so I did really like it. I do think, and here's the issue. I do think that there should have been more confidence. The director should have had more confidence. As we know, that's Ramsey Noah's like debut. I think there was some points where he should have had the confidence to believe that he can create this and not like over rely on like over explaining it to the audience. But it was all good. It was nice.
Like, what kind of cliches are you speaking about?
Oh, especially I think the part of the film that I don't think was that good was the love story between Kelly and the main character. Okay. I think that it was okay. He was able to communicate about the character, the relationship, the love between them without refusing to doing those things where they're feeding each other food or like relating to each other or like those. I think that the director should have had confidence that I can like get across what I want to about these characters without doing this. Yeah. But
you know what's funny? I even imagine like I think there's probably people who feel like there wasn't enough of the love part because they probably also just came for the love parts. Like they wanted to see the cliche romance. And I imagine that there's probably a lot more of that cliche romance that dropped off at the cutting board, like with the editor. But I see your point as well. I think in Nollywood, we have a tendency to rely on the cliches. A scene that pops in my head right now is when Namdi first meets Kelly and they walk to his car, and just the entire exchange in that scene, like it wasn't a cliche. I don't think.
Yes, it was so original. It was fresh.
It was pure. You understand? Like you can see the feeling in his eyes. You can see her being like, this guy kind of makes sense. And then I also liked the scene between them in the living room, right, when were they dancing or singing or something like that. Yeah. And I see your point there as well. I think even without the additional stuff, the love was definitely relayed. But again, it could have been him pandering to general audiences, which he didn't need to do as well. But pandering to people who feel that they need to see
that love, which is another. The thing is, Nollywood as a whole and love stories are so close together. They're like Nollywood is like 70% love story. And I find that really interesting because as industry matures, as it changes, we're having less of the love stories. What do you think about that? Like this movement from just not saying Cinderella meets the prince, she suffers, he's a good guy, they kiss, and what do you think about that? This movement away from romance?
I feel like romance in every industry is played out. What else can you do with the storyline? There's only so many variations of boy meets girl, boy and girl fight, boy and girl fall in love, and live happily ever after. But something someone told me once is really that every story is a love story in some regard. The question is whether or not they decide to hyper focus on that or to have it as a sideline. So even your action films with the gangs or whatever, those are probably there's this girl that he needs to save, or even if it's not a girl or his brother that he needs to. There's always that love story angle underneath it. I think the movement away is, I don't know if it's a complete movement away, more so as people adding more flavors and more types of soups, so to speak. So there's options so that we're broadening our audience reach, if that makes. What I don't like too much though is the hyper comedy focus.
Oh yes. So what did you think about the acting in Living?
I really liked Swanky, which is
Mm.
Jide Kene, the guy who plays Namdi. I felt like exactly, especially in scenes like the one I mentioned about the car, he's just very flexible. And I think that's also the word I used in the review with he just adapts to a situation. And I'm sure that's also reflective of directing because I know it didn't come out of nowhere. There were a few people that, for instance, Kelly,
Yeah.
Muna, really pretty, lovely. In the easy scenes, she does well. And there's one part
I'm sorry.
easy scenes Muna does well, but there's one particular scene that sticks out to me, and that's the scene where she sees they're in the bedroom and she sees a tattoo on Namdi's shoulder, and then she has to respond. And in that moment, I can tell the difference between, I can clearly see the director directing, the cinematographer doing his shots, and I can see Kelly trying. I can see Mona trying to be Kelly, and I didn't like that. And then there's also, I think it's hard to say, to really speak on people's acting when what they're doing is easy, as opposed to when you're actually required to do something that like convinces the audience otherwise, or something different or something new. So those two stuck out for me as far as acting. And then there was that journalist guy.
Oh, yes.
That journalist guy, I wasn't really sure what Oku was doing the entire movie.
No.
But as far as the acting goes, there was room for improvement. But, and I hate to compare with other works, but as far as what we've seen, this was actually, what were your thoughts on the acting?
Sankey Jerry, where I liked his acting. I think that there's this tendency in Nollywood. We have the beats that we want to go. We have what we recognize as acting, but I feel like he went a bit further. So scenes where he had to be scared, scenes where he had to be uncertain. I think that he really, those points, he was able to move beyond Nollywood acting to give us something that is better than what we would have been seeing from Nollywood. I agree about Ted. At that first scene where we meet her in the party, she's very good. But as more conflicts come, she is not able to handle it. And we both agree, what the hell was that journalist guy doing?
I'm not sure. I don't know.
I see where they wanted to go, but the worst thing I hate is when I can see actors act. And that's what he was trying to act. But the veterans as well. And that's why I really like the movie, because it went beyond asking them for the normal Nollywood expressions. It went asking them to be menacing, asking them to be not just scary, but, confident, hateful, devilish, especially
that church scene with Andy. Sorry to cut you off. That church scene with Ramsey and his real name's not Andy, right? Kenneth Okonkwo. That scene was acting. I loved it.
That scene was. You know what scene I also really loved? At the beginning, where when Namdi has a dream with Kanayo.
I adored it.
Yeah, that was a scene that needed more than the normal Nollywood scary ritualist acting. So when it comes to acting, that's what I love. When they go beyond what we see in Nollywood. When we see fear, uncertainty, venison. So I did. It was a well acted piece-ish.
I can only imagine how much fun that was for Kanayo to have a scene that required. I mean, it's still the usual, but required him to dig deeper than his regular ritualists.
That's
methods.
What I like about New Nollywood. That is asking even the veteran actors to go beyond, man. It's not everyday rituals. It's not everyday.
Exactly.
What did you think about the plot, the actual story, characters, the plot, the movements, the climax, all these things?
So I liked the story. For one, it had a story, which many Nigerian movies these days, I'm not really sure. I mean, I think they have stories, but the story is not enough to keep anybody seated. Going in, you already know that, Nandi is going to meet ritualists. You know that he's going to be tempted to go the ways of his father. The question is, does he go the way of his father? If he does, what is the repercussions for him? So you're not really coming in there completely unaware. But the development of the story, I think for me, the real test of a good story is if I'm connected to it. And I remember that scene with Namdi and his brother/cousin. But anyways, with that scene with him and his brother/cousin where he comes to meet him right before Ramsey is telling him, oh, kill him, kill him. That moment, I don't know, I feel a connection in the brotherhood. Like, it does a good job of telling a story that you feel like you belong in. I always go back to that like village scene, and this is where the directing and the story and the writing just come together beautifully for me, where Nandi first goes back to the village on the morning bus and he meets his cousin by the fruit cellar and they just run home. That felt like old Nollywood at its purest. It felt like the days of Blood Sisters. It just felt like I'm in the village, you know? It felt it was good storytelling, I think. You can argue that the end was rushed, but
the story is interesting. The climax is very well. I like the story. I like the plot. I just think that there were some points that needed to be sharper. There were some points that they needed to there were lots of scenes that they could have cut and would have made no difference to the story. But, that's just me. What about the look of the film? That film was the cinematography.
Right. I liked the shots that were chosen. I did feel like sometimes it was a bit unnecessary. So let's put it this way. There's this new Nollywood thing of just now that we have discovered drones, we're going to put them everywhere. We're going to have a bunch of drone shots. There are frames that we decided to make more grandeur. Like, why is everything so freaking spectacular? I get it. So there was a lot of things that you see that are supposed to create an effect. There was just moments where I'm like, this was not necessary. I also felt like there's this thing Nigerian movies tend to do a lot of, which is the music, where we have
audio and Nollywood. They are not friends at all.
At all.
Do you think that this movie was able to marry the two and not do the thing that most Nollywood movies do?
What is the thing that most Nollywood movies do in your estimation?
Just first of all, very loud music, very loud background, very loud soundtrack, very loud and often unmatched audios, so you can have this song going at 8:04 and you're struggling to hear.
No. So I don't think it did like that bit. I think they had a little sense in that regard. As far as the music and the very loud music, I think they did that mostly in the beginning parts, maybe to get people's attention, like appealing to their love of Afrobeats, so you will sit down and watch the movie. I think there's something Nollywood movies do that hopefully we fall back from, and that's just using overly intense music. I feel like sometimes less could be more and could be as effective. But again, I don't know if that's attributed to our culture, or if it's just lazy filmmaking. It's hard to say, because if you watch Indian movies, you'll see a lot more loud music than you will see in Korean dramas, and I tend to think that might just be the differences in cultures between people. So if Nigerian movies are using more intense music, I'm thinking maybe that's just our culture.
No, that's a question that we often ask as well. Where does our culture start, and where does just bad design start? All in all, what would be your conclusion on the movie?
I think if somebody has not seen a Nollywood movie before, this would be a good place to start. This would be one of the movies that I'd be like, okay, start here, watch this one. That for me says a lot. I thought it was a really good movie. What did I rate it? It was about an 8 out of 10 for me.
Oh, hi. My review on the movie was very well done, very cinematic. Could have been sharper. Could have been shorter. Could have been a lot shorter.
Could have been, yeah. I feel like we're all just getting to a point where if anything is up to 2 hours, we're like, why is this so freaking long? Honestly, our attention span is nonsense. Considering that you were watching part 1, part 2, and part 3 when you were reviewing these ones. Not just that, you're also watching season 1, season 2. So season 1 will have part 1 to 3, season 2 will have part 1 to 3. Now they're just asking you to watch 1 2.5 hour movie and we're complaining.
And it's too much.